Thank you very much, and welcome all of you, especially the students from Queens. We really enjoyed our conversation with you earlier, and I'm honored to be here tonight at the 92nd Street Y, and especially with my brother poet, Robin Robertson, who is also a dear friend and a poet whom I esteem greatly. I'm going to open with a poem about lighthouses. This one is from a journey I took to Ireland, and I was taken to the lighthouse at Hook, and it's just across the water from the lighthouse at Crook. And so I suspect that this expression we have, by hook or by crook, comes from the lighthouses. This one has a little of the history of how they're lit. And anyone who goes to visit lighthouses likes to be with their lighthouses alone. The problem is there are other people who like the lighthouses, and they're always there too, looking at each other with a kind of look that says, please go away. So I would like to read you. This is about the lighthouses and, of course, about something else. The Lightkeeper, a night without ships. Foghorns calling into walled cloud, and you, still alive, drawn to the light, as if it were a fire kept by monks. Darkness once crusted with stars, but now death dark as you sail inward. Through wild gorse and sea wrack, through heather and torn wool you ran, pulling me by the hand so I might see this for once in my life. The spin and spin of light, the whirring of it. Light in search of the lost, there since the era of fire, era of candles and hollow wick lamps, whale oil and solid wick, colza and lard, kerosene and carbide, the signal fires lighted on this perilous coast in the Tower of Hook. You say to me, stay awake. Be like the lens maker who died with his lungs full of glass. Be the yew in blossom when bees swarm. Be their amber cathedral, and even the ghosts of Cistercians will be kind to you. In a certain light as after rain, in pearled clouds or the water beyond, seen or sensed water, sea or lake, you would stop still and gaze out for a long time. Also when fireflies opened and closed in the pines, and a star appeared, our only heaven. You taught me to live like this, that after death it would be as it was before we were born. Nothing to be afraid. Nothing but happiness as unbearable as the dread from which it comes. Go toward the light always. Be without ships. I had a grandmother from former Czechoslovakia, Anna, whom I grew up with, and she has to be in every book. She died in 1968, but she's still often in the room with me if I write late at night. And I hear her kind of behind me saying, I want to be in the book. So I give her a poem. This is her poem, but it's not of my childhood, it's of her childhood. It's a prose poem, The Crossing. No matter how early I woke, how light it was or wet the fields, and whether or not the horses from the stable down the road had broken their fence and were grazing near our windows as horses in a dream, Anna would be gone, already risen, out pounding the earth with her pronged hoe. She never woke me, although I slept beside her, and it was like sleeping near a hill wrapped in house silk. Her teeth floated in water on the nightstand where she kept her spectacles, this woman who had crossed as a girl of my age in the hold of a ship for weeks. Lowering her bucket of night soil by rope, then from the sea-rinsed bucket, pouring seawater over herself on the lower deck where bathing was permitted. The salt stiffened her hair and burned her eyes, but she was clean. It isn't what they tell you, Piscle, calling me the name of a little bird that sings too much. If there were no cattle, no horses or sheep, and nothing to be sold, they would take people whose passage had been paid and whose forfeit put up. Our papers were in order, and we had the passage and forfeit. Money given to a bank to guarantee our upkeep, so we could board the ship with our own blankets. They gave us drinking water, but shut off all water at night. 2 weeks of the rocking boat and stink of buckets. All of us asleep on the planks, such rise and fall, such pitch of the ship. But some nights on deck, holding the rails for all her life. She said she plowed the sea, as she once did the fields, and into the furrows of light went the seeds, and the black-winged waters fell upon them. I had a friend who's a young poet. He was a student of mine for 7 years, beginning when he was 19 years old. He was a refugee from Ukraine. His name is Ilya Kaminsky. He is a poet of the book Dancing in Odessa. And after 7 years, I became his teacher. And we went together back to Odessa when he was in his late 20s, so he could see the town again. But we also visited St. Petersburg, shrine of the silver poets of Russia, because he had to visit the shrine. This poem takes place in Tsarskoye Selo, which is the town of the summer palace outside of St. Petersburg, the summer palace of the Tsars. But it's also the town where Anna Akhmatova spent her girlhood summers, and the town where Alexander Pushkin went to school. This is a poem for Ilya written in Tsarskoye Selo. We stand at the casement window of Pushkin's lycée. These are the desks where Pushkin wrote, his chalkboards, his astrolabe. Snow falls from here into the past and vanishes on golden minarets. Snow recedes from the birches. A lesson writes itself in winter chalk. On the day Michelangelo died in Rome, Galileo was born in Pisa. Isaac Newton was born the year Galileo died. When they searched for Kabir, they found nothing beneath his shroud but a sprig of jasmine. Man is like the statue whispering about the marble chiseled from his mouth. You are the guardian of this statue, standing in your silent world. The year Isaac Newton died, there was a barn fire during a puppet show. Kabir says, all corpses go to the same place, and the world has fallen in love with a dream. This life is not the same as your other life. We are here now in one of the shrines of the silver poets. You are one of the silver. The snow is a white peacock in a Russian poem. This is also for Ilya. The city where he grew up, Odessa, it's like a city that landed from space. It was built by Catherine the Great, all at once on the shores of the Black Sea, and behind it is the Russian steppe, endless steppe. And because there were no trees in the city, they decided to tax each ship that came into the harbor one tree. Each ship had to bring a tree with it to plant in Odessa. So now the city's full of trees. Exile. The city of your childhood rises between steppe and sea, wheat and light, white with the dust of cockle shells, stargazers, and bones of pipefish. City of limestone soft enough to cut with a hatchet, where the sea unfurls and acacias brought by Greeks on their ships turn white in summer. So yes, you remember, this is the city you lost. City of smugglers and violinists, chess players and monkeys, an opera house, a madhouse, a ghost church with wind for a choir, where two things were esteemed: literature and ships, poetry and the sea. If you return now, it will not be as a being visible to others. And when you walk past, it will not be as if a man had passed, but rather as if someone had remembered something long forgotten and wondered why. If you return, your father will be alive to prepare for you his mint cucumber soup or give you the little sweet called bird's milk. And after hours of looking with him for his sandals lost near the sea, you visit again together the amusement park where your ancestors are buried, and then go home to the apartment house built by German prisoners of war, to whom your father gave bread, which you remember surprised you. You take the tram to a stop where it is no longer possible to get off, and he walks with you until he vanishes, still holding in his own your invisible hand. I'm going to read now a poem for Daniel Simcoe, who was a librarian at the New York Public Library. He was a quiet poet who hid all his work in a drawer. He never thought his poems were ready. And he died in 2004, suddenly. And after he died, I went to the drawer and opened it and took the poems out. And they're now published by Four-Way Books in a book called The Arrival. We went together to Prague right after the Velvet Revolution because he wanted to go get his books and his jazz records he had left in an attic for 22 years. I didn't bother to tell him what might happen to jazz records in an attic after 22 years, but I wanted to find my family, so we went. And this little story of how we went. He and his friends got together and did a little prank when the Soviets invaded Czechoslovakia. They were only 11 years old when they did it. The little prank is in the poem. Last bridge. So, Adrianska, you were with him in his final hours, and I give you that. Speaking the language understood only in the kitchen of childhood. For you, a lamp-lit tongue spoken in tomato gardens and prison camps by those sent away and those who let them be sent. So many words for no one and nothing. Until history came for them too, with its years of industry and waste, a tram pulling black smoke behind itself. These are the suitcases manufactured in communist times from balsa and tin. Here are the books, ink on vellum, sold by hoodlums on the black market. We must have crossed the bridge a dozen times those nights, but can you imagine, alone, with no one from whom to borrow a match. There appeared a Russian deserter from Afghan war who drew caricatures for small change but never drew our likeness. And some nights there was singing beneath stone angels, but we were otherwise alone. Svetko's memories were of the scent of garlic fields beside the river and of riding in the basket of his father's bicycle along its banks. On the night of the invasion, there was a radio and red-starred jeeps that would become white-starred jeeps in the west. Svetko, with his friends, turned the street signs around, and the enemy marched into Austria. So it is over, you tell me. When he closed his eyes, there were swans. You took his hand on the last bridge and made him laugh. You have my yes, Adrianska. This is a poem that came very late, 30 years after it happened. Sometimes that happens. We were talking about it tonight with the students, that sometimes it takes a long time. This poem has a difficult thing in it. It's a kind of an obscene thing, really. But it was about a little girl. We used to, in El Salvador for a while, we always routinely, daily looked for bodies, tried to match them with photographs of missing people. And this one girl stayed with me. And so this is her poem, The Ghost of Heaven. Zopilotes, by the way, are vultures or turkey buzzards. I'm not sure exactly because I didn't know much about birds then. The Ghost of Heaven. Sleep to sleep through 30 years of night. A child, herself with child, for whom we searched. Through here or there, amidst bones still sleeved and trousered, a spine picked clean, a paint can, a skull with hair. Night to night, child, walking toward me through burning maze, over the clean bones of those whose flesh was lifted by Zopilotes into heaven. So that is how we ascend, in the clawed feet of fallen angels, to be assembled again in the workrooms of the clouds. She rose from where they found her lying not far from a water urn, leaving herself behind on the ground, where they found her, holding her arms before her as if she were asleep. Blue smoke rising from corn cribs, a flap of wings on the walls of the city streets, a plague of initials. Walking through a firelit river to a burning house. Dead singer, sewing machine, and piece of dress. Outside, a cashew tree wept, blackened cashews over lamina. Outside, paper fireflies rose to the stars. Bring penicillin if you can, you said. Surgical tape, a whetstone, mosquito repellent, but not the aerosol kind. Especially, bring a syringe for sucking phlegm, a knife, wooden sticks, a clamp, and plastic bags. You will also need a bottle of cloud for anesthesia, to sleep like the flight of a crane through colorless dreams. When a leech opens your flesh, it leaves a small volcano. Always pour turpentine over your hair before going to sleep. Such experiences as these are forgotten before memory intrudes. The girl was found. Don't say this. With a man's severed head stuffed into her where a child would have been. No one knew who the man was, another of the dead. So they had not, after all, killed a pregnant girl. This was a relief to them. That sound in the brush, a settling of wind in sorghum. If they capture you, talk, please. Yes, you heard me the first time. You will be asked who you are. Eventually, we are all asked who we are. All who come into the world, all who come into the world are sent. Open your curtain of spirit. Morning on the island. The lights across the water are the waking city. The water shimmers with imaginary fish. Not far from here lie the bones of conifers washed from the sea and piled by wind. Some mornings I walk upon them, bone to bone, as far as the lighthouse. A strange beetle has eaten most of the trees. It may have come here on the ships playing music in the harbor, or it was always here, a winged jewel, but in the past was kept still by the cold of a winter that no longer comes. There is an owl living in the firs behind us, but he is white, meant to be mistaken for snow burdening a bough. They say he is the only owl remaining. I hear him at night, listening for the last of the mice and asking who of no other owl. In time of war, this is a little bit about ghosts, so I suppose it's the right time of year, but it's not about ghosts. In time of war, and so we stayed, night after night, lying awake until the moon fell behind the blackened cypress, and bats returned to their caverns, having gorged on the night air, and all remained still until the hour of rising, when the headless woman was no longer seen near the walls, nor a ghostly drum heard, nor anyone taking the form of mist or a fiddler. And the box never opened of itself, nor were there whispers and other sounds, no rustling dress or pet ape trapped in a secret passage, but there was labored breathing and unseen hands leafing through the pages of a visitor's book. And above the ruins, a girl in white lace, and 5 or more candles floating, and someone saw a white dog bound into a nearby wood. But there were no bagpipes, nor smiling skull, no skeletons piled in the oubliette, and no one saw a woman carrying her own severed head. And there was, as it turned out, no yellow monkey, no blood leaking from a slit throat. But there were children standing on their own graves, and there was the distant rumble of cannon. Resurrection after Ingeborg Bachmann. Reading the last paragraphs of their lives, where they lived, how they came to the end. As with fallen snow in late spring, or as before dark, the black clouds drift in a cloudless sky. In the folds below the snow, elk graze the remains of an August fire in dread weather. Small white-breasted birds dip like swallows and go pine to pine. So life after death. The brave know they will not rise again, that no flesh will grow about them at judgment morning, that nothing of this is waiting. I am not brave. We have only to remember one piece of what we saw, and all will come back. Harmalapi. It begins with a word as small as the cry of Athena's owl, an ache in the cage of breath, as when we say, can hardly breathe. In sleep we see our name on a stone, for instance, or while walking in the rain among graves, we feel watched. Others are still coming into our lives. They come, they go out. Some speak quietly beside us on the bench near where koi swim. At night there is a light sound of wings brushing the walls. Not now is what it sounds like, or two other words. But they are the same passerines as live in the stone eaves, as forage in the air toward night. To see them, one must not be looking. I've spent the last 4 summers, part of the summers in Greece, and it's a place called Tassos that used to be called Aria Tassos. It's an island in the northern Aegean. There's a little town in the center of it on a peak called Theologos, Word of God. So there's a fisherman there that I go out to sea with, and he's been doing it all his life. So I'm going to close with this poem for him on the island of Theologos. For a 3rd year we are living on Aria Tassos, island of marble and pines. Marble the quietest of stones. Pines the first tree after a fire. Marble the stone of the dead, the stone of the sleeping face. This is an island of exiles, and therefore pure. Its sea flocked with boats in day hours. In the swells, the Avantula rises and falls, a boat alive and awake. In a clear dawn, the islands of Samothraki, Limnos, and Lesvos are visible. Later in the morning, there is too much light. You may catch birds in nets, the first poet wrote, but you cannot in nets catch their song. These fragments of Artichoke were found on a slip of paper used to wrap a mummy. He lived here, it was said, on an island that lies in the sea like the backbone of an ass, making the first iambs. He wrote sparks in wheat, and it seems from accounts he fought and fornicated mostly. Later in the day, Kyrios Tomatas takes the boat to think with him on open sea setting nets. Mount Athos is in the distance. Sea wind fills the olives. A ship crosses along the seam of air and sea. Hillocks and canyons of cloud, clouds light-strewn, castle-walled, shore and cirrus, an island of dry rock where blossoms a tree. This is where the skinned goat turned on the spit. This is where we knelt on walnut leaves in the town of the Word. Thank you.
Thank you to Alice. And in a kind of answer to the last poem that Carolyn read there, this is a poem about where I'm from, Aberdeen. The grey sea turns in its sleep, disturbing seagulls from the green rock. We watched the long collapse, the black drop and frothing of the toppled wave, looked out on the dark that goes to Norway. We lay all night in an open boat that rocked by the harbour wall, listening to the tires creak at the stone quay, trying to keep time, till the night fishers came in their ark, their lap of light. The fat slap of waves, the waters sway, the water mullioned with light. The sifting rain, italic rain, the smur that drifted down for days, the sleet, your hair full of hail as if sown there. In the damp sheets we left each other sea gifts, watermarks, long lost now in all these years of the riptide swell and trawl. All night the feeding storm banked up the streets and houses. In the morning the sky was yellow, the frost ringing. The grey sea turns in its sleep, disturbing seagulls from the green rock. I've been enjoying your American autumn in various places over the last week, so I thought I'd read a translation of an early poem by Rilke called Herbst Autumn. I've called it Fall. I knew that Rilke wrote it very soon after arriving in Paris in 1902, but it was only much later when the book I included it in was in proof and the Twin Towers had come down that I found out that Rilke wrote this on the 11th of September. Fall. The leaves are falling from trees in dying gardens far above us, as if their slow free fall was the sky declining. And tonight, this heavy earth is falling away from all the other stars, drawing into silence. We are all falling now. My hand, my heart, stall and drift in darkness, seesawing down. And we still believe there is one who sifts and holds the leaves, the lives of all those softly falling. I've been writing recently a series of invented Scots folk narratives. And these have something in common with the Celtic folk tradition. That is to say, they are everyday stories of murder, rape, madness, congenital malformation, and selkies, seals who turn into humans and then turn back into seals. This is the first one I'll read tonight. This is called By Clachan Bridge. I remember the girl with the hare lip down by Clachan Bridge, cutting up fish to see how they worked. By morning's end, her nails were black red, her hands all sequined silver. She unpuzzled rabbits to a rickle of bones, dipped into a dormouse for the pip of its heart. She'd open everything, that girl. They say they found wax dolls in her wall, poppets full of human hair, but I'd say they're wrong. What's true is that the blacksmith's son, the simpleton, came down here once and fathomed her, claimed she licked him clean as a whistle. I remember the tiny stars of her hands around her belly as it grew, and how, after a year, nothing came. How she said it was still there inside her, a stone baby. And how I saw her wrists bangled with scars, and those hands flittering at her throat to the plectrum of bone she'd hung there. As to what happened to the blacksmith's boy, no one knows, and I'll keep my tongue. Last thing I heard, the starlings had started to mimic her crying, and she'd found how to fly. I've noticed over the years that the two main sections of all my poetry readings, carnality and mortality, there used to be, the carnality section used to go on for quite a long time. But now, unfortunately, it's the other way around. I'll dedicate this tonight to Alice Quinn, who published it first. Artichoke. The nubbed leaves come away in a tease of green, thinning down to the membrane, the quick, purpled beginnings of the male. Then the slow hairs of the heart, the choke that guards its trophy, its vegetable goblet. The meat of it lies displayed, upended, al dente, the stub root aching in its oil. And I was commissioned, for reasons I didn't understand then and don't understand now, to write a poem about a locksmith. So I dutifully went and researched locksmithery. And that was relatively interesting, but didn't take me quite where I wanted to go. So then I thought, well, how about the similarities between a poem and a lock, this kind of secret machine, which was also sort of interesting. But in the end, I decided to write what I wanted to write anyway all along. But there are traces of the original research. Wedding the Locksmith's Daughter. The slow-grained slide to embed the blade of the key is a sheathing, a gliding on graphite, pushing inside to find the ribs of the lock. Sunk home, the true key slots to its matrix. Geared, tight-fitting, they turn together, shooting the spring lock, throwing the bolt. Dactyls, iambics, the clinch of words, the hidden couplings in the cased machine, a chime of sound on sound, the way the sung note snibs on meaning and holds. The lines engage and marry now, their bells are keeping time. The church doors close and open underground. But in the end, all you ever get is a room looking out on the rain. This is called exposure. Rain, you said, is silence turned up high. It has been raining now for days. Even when it stops, there is still the sound of rain water laboring to find some way into the ground. We lie in grim embrace, these two halves trying to be whole, straining for this break in the static, in the white noise that was rain falling all day and all through the sheeted night. Silence is rain with the sound turned down, and I stare out now on a clear view of something left out on the line. A life, snagged there, drenched, shrunken, unrecognizably mine. And if it's not rain, it's snow. This is set on the very first day of a year after a heavy fall of snow. The park drunk. He opens his eyes to a hard frost, the morning's soft amnesia of snow. The thorned stems of gorse are starred crystal, each bud like a candied fruit, its yellow picked out and lit by the low pulse of blood orange riding in the eastern trees. what the snow has furred to silence, uniformity. Frost amplifies, makes singular, giving every form a sound, an edge, as if frost wants to know what snow tries to forget. And so he drinks for winter, for the coming year, to open all the beautiful tiny doors in their craquelure of frost. And he drinks like the snow falling, trying to close the biggest door of all. I hasten to add that wasn't autobiographical, but the next two are, this is being the mortality section, which just keeps on giving. This is about my father. It's called Ghost of a Garden. Sometimes I discover I have gone downstairs, crossed the grass, and found myself in here, the tool shed, caught in a lash of brambles, bindweed, and tall ivied trees like pipe cleaners. It looks out vacantly on a garden run to seed, the lost tennis court, grown over benches, a sunken barbecue snagged with blown roses. The courtyard walls are full of holes the swallows try to sow in and out of them like open doors. In the corner of the shed, my father is weeping, and I cannot help him because he is dead. And this is a poem about the loss of a daughter, not a death, I'm happy to say, just that moment when a father knows that a child is no longer really a child. This is set on a beach on the west of Ireland at the end of the summer. Donegal for Ellie. Ardent on the beach at Rosnala on the last day of summer, you ran through the shallows, throwing off shoes and shirt and towel like the seasons, the city's years, all caught in my arms as I ploughed on behind you, guardian still of dry clothes, of this little heart, not quite 13, breasting the waves and calling back to me to join you, swimming in the Atlantic on the last day of summer. I saw a man in the shallows with his hands full of clothes, full of all the years, and his daughter going where he knew he could not follow. A long time ago, I had an operation to correct a congenital heart murmur, and I've written a few poems in the past about that. This is not as serious as those because, like everything else, heart surgery has its funny side. And sometime after the operation, in the middle of the night, the 6-inch wound in my chest opened up. And this was regrettable for many reasons. Mostly, it was because it was a Saturday night, and at that point I was living in South London in Brixton, and the nearest casualty department was famous then and now as a kind of war zone where they wouldn't really look at you seriously unless you had an axe in your head. A&E. It was like wetting the bed, waking up that night, soaked through, my sutures open again and the chest wound hemorrhaging. Pulling on jeans and an overcoat, I called a car to Camberwell, and in through the shivering rubber doors, presented myself at that Saturday night abattoir of casualty at King's on Denmark Hill. At this front line, behind her desk and barred window, the triage nurse was already waving me away, till I parted the tweed to show her what I had going on underneath. Unfashionable, but striking nonetheless, my chest undone like some rare waistcoat, with that lace-up front, that black échelle, its red wet-look leatherette, those fancy flapping lapels. This is about a cat, but don't for a moment suggest that all's well in the feline world. This is about a cat dying of cancer. And I'm sorry about that. Cat failing. A figment, a thumbed maquette of a cat, some ditched plaything, something brought in from outside, his white fur stiff and grey, coming apart at the seams. I study the muzzle of perished rubber, one ear eaten away, his sour body lumped like a bean bag, leaking thinly into a grim towel. I sit and watch the light degrade in his eyes. He tries and fails to climb to his chair, shirks in one corner of the kitchen, cowed, denatured, ceasing to be anything like a cat. And there's a new look in those eyes that refuse to meet mine, and it's the shame of being found out. Just that, and with that, loss of face. His face, I see, has turned human. There are very few figures in Greek mythology who have had more violence done to them than, for a simple mistake, than the hunter Actaeon. When Actaeon took a break from hunting deer in the forest with his dogs and went looking for fresh water, he stumbled down into a spring and disturbed the goddess Artemis bathing naked in a pool. His punishment for this was to be turned into a deer and pursued and torn apart by his own dogs. In this very short poem, which sort of poses as a translation, I imagine the dead Actaeon addressing his mother. You are sleeping, mother, and do not know my fate. I wish you could wake and embrace me, much changed as I am, with the horns and the hair of a stag, and only the eyes and voice the same as Actaeon. My dogs did what I trained them to do, forgive them. If you see my lost bow, break it, bury it with my bones. I know you found no sign of them in the woods, but look again. Look for a freckled coat and not a tunic, branched antlers, not smooth temples, and longer legs than you remember, that end not in feet, but in hooves. I'm sure that you'll all be familiar with bothies or shillings, those small huts on the sides of mountains where climbers and hikers can find shelter from bad weather. I've always found these huts absolutely terrifying. This is a poem about one of those huts. I suppose it's a kind of extended unheimlich maneuver, if you get my gist. It's called The Shelter. I should never have stayed here in this cold shieling once the storm passed and the rain had finally eased. I could make out shapes inside, the occasional sound, a muffled crying which I took for wind in the trees. A wasp stuttering there at the windowsill. I listened. What looked like a small red coat was dripping from its wire hanger. There was a shift and rustle coming from the bucket in the corner by the door. I found inside a crumpled fist of balled up paper, slowly uncrinkling. On the hearth, just legible in the warm ash, my name and dates. And above that, in a shard of mirror left in the frame, I caught sight of myself wearing something like a black brooch at the neck. Then I looked more closely, and I saw what it was. When I grew up in Aberdeen, which was a harbour town, fishing town. And I used to spend a lot of time with the trawlermen, who were other creatures altogether. They were not of this world, not of the land. They only really understood themselves when they were at sea. This mentions a few place names. Callanish is a great stone circle, Neolithic stone circle in the Outer Hebrides. Dunnottar and Drum are two ruined castles on the east coast. The fisherman's farewell. Their long stares mark them apart, eyes gone to sea colours, grey, foam-flecked, and black in the undertow, blue as the blue banners of the mackerel whipping west. On land, they are smoke walkers, where each stone is a standing stone, every circle a stone circle. They would be rumour if they could, in this frozen landscape like a stopped sea, from the great stone keels of Callanish to the walls of Dunnottar and Drum. They would be less even than rumour, to be ocean stealers, to never throw a shadow, to dream the blank horizon and dread the sight of land. The drink storms through these men, encompasses them till they're all at sea again. Their houses heeled over in the sand, each ruin now a cairn for kites. And down by the quay, past empty pots, unmended nets and boats, this tiny bar where men sleep upright in their own element as seals. So, before the grim Scottish finale, I'll read some love poems, or at least poems with some new sense of contentment. This one is is about chasing the last of the day's sun. A love poem trying to stay out of the shadows. It's a sonnet. It's called Abandon. That moment when the sun ignites the valley and picks out every bud that's greened that afternoon. When birds spill from the trees like shaken sheets, that sudden loosening into beauty, the want in her eyes fleet blue, the medals of light on water, the way the water intrigued about her feet, the ocean walking her out into its depth, sea lighting the length of her from the narrow waist to the weight of the breasts, the way she lifted her eyes to me and handed me back, simplified. That moment, at the end, knowing the one I had abandoned was myself, edging with the sun around the bay's scoop of rocks, rolling the last gold round the glass, that shelving love as the sun was lost to us and the sky bruised and the stones grew cold as the shells on the beach at Naxos. And the happier they get, the shorter they become. It's an 8-line poem. It takes its title from a little village on the southwest of the Isle of Islay in the Inner Hebrides, Portnahaven. We walked the cliff of Portnahaven, listening to the grey seals sing on Orsay and Eileen McConaughey across the little harbour. Were they singing for the love of being here in this place, like us, far from griefs? And were they also singing as we were to each other? And the shortest poem that I've ever written is certainly the most cheerful. The Key. The door to the walled garden, the place I'd never been, was opened with a simple turn of the key I'd carried with me all these years. So I would like to thank Bernard for inviting us here, to Alice for her wildly overgenerous introduction, to Carolyn, my great friend and superb poet, a wonderful gift to share the stage with you tonight, and to you all for coming. But it would be entirely wrong of me to leave you on such a buoyant, upbeat note. So I will finish with another one of these invented Scots narratives. This is called At Roan Head. You'd know her house by the drawn blinds, by the cormorants pitched on the boundary wall, the black crosses of their wings hung out to dry. You'd tell it by the quicken and the pine that hid it from the sea and from the brief light of the sun, and by Angus the collie lying at the door where he died, a rack of bones like a sprung trap. A fork of barnacle geese came over with that slow squeak of rusty saws, the bitter seas complaining pool and roll, a whicker of pigeons lifting in the wood. She'd had 4 sons, I knew that well enough, and each one wrong. All born blind, they say, slack-jawed and simple, web-footed, rickety as sticks. Beautiful faces, I'm told, though blank as air. Someone saw them once outside, hurpling down to the shore, chittering like rats, and said they were fine swimmers, but I would have guessed at that. Her husband left her, said they couldn't be his, they were more fish than human, said they were beglamoured, and searched their skin for the showing marks. For years she tended each difficult flame, their tight, flickering bodies. Each night she closed the scales of their eyes to smoor the fire. Until he came again, that last time, thick with drink, saying he'd had enough of this, all this witchery, and made them stand in a row by their beds, twitching. Their hands flapped, herring eyes rolled in their heads. He went along the line, relaxing them, one after another, with a small knife. It's said she goes out every night to lay blankets on the graves to keep them warm. It would put the heart across you, all that grief. There was an otter worrying in the leaves, a heron loping slow over the water when I came at scrake of day back to her door. She'd hung 4 stones in a necklace, wore 4 rings on the hand that led me past the room with 4 small candles burning, which she called the room of rain. Milky smoke poured up from the grate like a waterfall in reverse, and she said my name, and it was the only thing and the last thing that she said. She gave me a skylark's egg in a bed of frost, gave me twists of my 4 sons' hair, gave me her husband's head in a wooden box. Then she gave me the sealskin, and I put it on. Thank you.